this tutorial, we're going to be photographing the amazing Mauna Bay Hotel and Bungalows on the Big Island of Hawaii. This luxury property has a lot of unique and challenging places to photograph, and I'm super excited to work through a wide variety of locations you might face on a similar job site. I'm going to share everything I know about shooting a fancy hotel like this, so without further ado, let's jump into the first lesson. For the first shot of this hotel and commercial architectural photography tutorial, we're going to be starting with what appears to be the most simple room, the basic hotel with a view. Now for the other tutorials that you may have seen or purchased, I started off simple and we built to more complicated shots. But for this one, if you're buying this tutorial, I assume you know what you're doing and we're going to jump right into the complicated stuff. So although this is the first lesson of the tutorial and a very simple looking shot, it's actually very complicated. If this is the first time you've seen me work, this may be a little bit overwhelming. You may want to skip ahead and take a look at some of my other methods, which will give you a more solid foundation from which to approach this photo. So what makes these so complicated? First of all, they're tiny rooms. That means you can't hide your lights anywhere, but you've got to show the entire thing. So we're shooting very wide. We can't hide lights. The dynamic range is insane. We have almost nuclear exterior, bright overhead noon sunlight, and a completely dark interior with wood-paneled walls. On top of that, for hotel imagery more than any other, things have got to be absolutely perfect. Perfectly clean, perfectly retouched, and perfectly lit. In many cases, a standard hotel room is not going to be the most impressive thing on planet Earth, but it is our job to make them look flawless. So we have to make these rooms look amazing. We've got to show the view, we've got to show the interior, and they've got to be spotless. But that being said, we can't embellish too much. We have to be factual about this. What you see in the picture has got to be there when you show up to the room. Otherwise, what's going to happen is guests are going to go on TripAdvisor or Expedia and say, such and such was in the picture, but it wasn't there, I want a free night, etc., etc. So we have to be accurate and factual while also showing everything that you would expect as soon as you walk into this room. So that being said, keep in mind, this is advertising photography. We have to give it a little bit of sparkle, but again, we can't go so far overboard as to be unrealistic. There's a very fine line here between going too far and doing too little. And for all those reasons that I just mentioned, that is why hotel photography can be so fickle and difficult. So let's get started. Like with every single shot that I take, the first thing we're going to do here is find our composition. Let's be honest here, the angle is going to be pretty obvious. We have to show the view, we have to show the bed, we've got to show the patio and how the room works. But just so you get an idea of how the room looks, I've gone ahead and taken shots from everywhere around the room, and I'm going to show you those right now. Now, from this first shot, you can see I'm standing on the patio looking back towards the room. And honestly, there's really no point to this shot. In a hotel like this, even though most of the rooms are identical, they can charge more for rooms with a view. And in order to differentiate between a room with a view and a room without a view, obviously we have got to show the view so people know what they're going to expect when they pay more money for a room with a view. You're really going to have to read your client on this and sit down and meet with them about what they want. Some hotels are going to want multiple shots per room, but some hotels are going to want one shot of 5 or 10 different room types. And if that is the case, you need to make sure that you're showing the most important aspects of the room with each shot. So while we could shoot from here looking back into the room, that's definitely not the money shot. That is not the shot that's going to get people to open up their wallets and stay at this hotel. We need to show the view if we're going to do one shot per room. So let's go over to this corner by the bed. There are a couple reasons I don't like this shot. First of all, the bed is enormous. It turns into an almost aircraft carrier in size. Way too big, way too dominant in the frame. If you've watched any of my other tutorials, you know that I like there to be space where a human eye or human could walk into the picture and navigate through the frame. The bed is blocking everything. It's impossible to walk through, there's no path for the eye to follow. And again, being this close to the bed, not only is it gigantic, but it blocks a lot of the room. It blocks the couch and the light and the table over here, and it even blocks some of the view. So I'm not too in love with that. Another reason I don't like this angle is that this wall to my left is a bit dull and featureless. While yes, we do get some TV and some of this dresser, there's nothing else interesting on this wall. So now that we know why this angle doesn't work, let's take a look from this angle and see why that doesn't work. Now I think we're starting to get hot here. I do like this angle a lot better. There's still a few little problems with it though. For example, the dresser blocks a lot of the desk. Another problem is that we're actually a little bit too close to the bed, and not only is it huge, but it's still getting distorted a little bit. So for that reason, I don't think this is the shot. It is kind of splitting hairs, but I do think I'm going to want to back up and get in this hallway here and get as far away from the furniture as I can to reduce the distortion and make the proportions of the room look as natural as possible. So I've just been scouting using a 24 or 17 millimeter. I think that what I'm going to end up using is a 17 millimeter lens. And the reason for that is that I need to show the entire room, and I can always crop in a little bit. I can deliver a wider shot, and if they want to crop in a little bit or leave some room for text or something in a layout, they can do so. I do feel that in this space, 24 is a little bit too tight, so I'm going to go with 17. It's going to be a bit trickier to light, but it's going to give us some room to breathe when it comes to using this photo for layout and on the web. Now, again, if you've seen my architectural photography tutorials, you know that I like to shoot a bit tighter. I like to use a longer lens to create more graphic compositions based on space and light. A shot like this for a hotel or for a real estate agent is purely more about being informational. I want to show as much as I can while still being realistic about the space. While we might get lucky and be able to pull off a nice artistic shot with a tighter lens, for this, I'm not too worried about making this look like a piece of art. I want it to be, again, an informational shot that has some zing, that shows this room and everything contained within it in the best possible light. So I've moved into the hallway and I really like this angle. You may notice that as I'm trying to find the perfect shot, I'm kind of crouching, I'm moving around and going up and down. I'm trying to find the perfect height for this shot. Now, I want to be careful that I don't go too low. I don't want the railing to obscure the horizon, and at the same time, I don't want to go too high. I want to be lower than 6'2". Like I said, I'm taller than average, but I still want to be within the range of human height, so that when you walk in and see the room, the photo you saw online is completely believable. If you compare this shot to the one I just shot in the corner, they're both pretty good, but I do like this one better. There's a clearer path to the view fills a bit more of the frame, the dresser is not blocking the desk, and we don't see a ton of the front of the bed. I feel like this one personally feels a lot more balanced as a result. So now that I know the general area from which I'm going to shoot, I'm going to get the tripod and frame up the perfect shot. I'm using a Really Right Stuff TVC 33 tripod. Very versatile, a little bit big, but gets into a lot of tight spaces, and then an Arca Swiss C1 Cube. This is basically the Cadillac or Bentley of geared heads. It is amazing. Like, as you can see, I'm in this really tight space right now. I actually have one of these legs jammed into the mini fridge to get the camera in the perfect location. The tripod might not be able to get perfectly level, but what I love about this cube is that it has a leveling head, so the tripod can be in whatever wonky position. Without even looking through the viewfinder, I can level the camera and then pan and not get any of that weird slanty action that happens when you pan with an unlevel tripod. So this is really an invaluable tool for shooting these tight hotel rooms where you know the camera is going to be in a hard to access spot. Now you may look at this and get a little bit of sticker shock. It's like $1,600. For years I've used ball heads, I've used cheaper gear heads. Now with the ball head, what happens is there's always a little bit of sag, so you might dial in the perfect composition, you got it framed up, and then you tighten the ball head and you're going to get that crazy little sag, and you're going to have to fix your verticals in post, which is not really fun. So I recommend a geared head. Like I said, this is the Cadillac of geared heads. You don't need to spend $1,600 on this. You can get a Manfrotto 410 or a 405. They start at about $200, $250. It'll make your life a lot easier. The basic idea of a geared head is that I can turn individual gears and make exact adjustments with no sag. As you can see, as I turn this, the camera stays exactly where I put it, and it does not move once I release it. Now that I've got my camera locked down in the perfect position, let's take an exposure for the room itself and see what we're up against. Now that I've got my composition locked in, the first thing that I always do is stage the scene. I want to go ahead and make everything look as perfect as I can before I start photographing and lighting. When I stage, I start by staging the foreground. This is the closest area to the camera, and as a result, it's very important to get the foreground perfect because the objects in the foreground are going to be much bigger than those in the background. The first thing we've got to work on is staging the bed. There's a lot of work to do, and it's a lot of detail work, so it can get a little bit boring, but bear with me. None of this is out of the ordinary. In fact, it probably happens on every single hotel I shoot. The runner is usually too far one way or another, and we have a huge expanse of white bed. So what I usually do is I end up moving the runner a bit towards the pillows just to break up that white expanse of bed. Something like that. Another common problem is that the skirt is often not perfectly level. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to level out that skirt. To get it nice and even all the way across, I'll lift it up, put some tension on it so that it stays put once I move it, and then I use these A-clamps to kind of fasten it so that it doesn't move. There we go. Right there. And I know that we're not going to see this, so I can let it lay over that A-clamp, because again, the camera's over there, we're not going to see this bulge. So I've clamped the skirt, I've made it perfectly level. If I look down, and it's looking pretty good. And now it looks nice and taut, nice and even. Another common thing is the linens on the bed. We've got to make them look nice and even and as unwrinkled as we can. So again, I'm going to pull those nice and taut, run my hand over them, smooth out any of those wrinkles. And in a perfect world, these would all be ironed and steamed on site, but I'm going to teach you how to fix that in Photoshop as well. Because as you know, things are not always perfect when you're shooting architecture. Keep in mind that I'm mostly working on this side, pulling it this way, and the camera doesn't see any of this. The camera is only seeing the other side, so when I tighten on this side, it smooths it out to the camera. Now the next thing is the pillows. The pillows are always tricky when you're shooting hotels. They've got to be perfect, nice and plump, fluffed up, perky. So there's a few tricks that I use to get the pillows looking really nice. First, obviously, is we're going to fluff them. We're going to get some life into them and make sure that they're nice and even in the pillowcases. And once we've got them nice and even, I can put them in there. Get this out of the way for now. And what I want to do is make sure that the corners of the pillow look like they've got some life to them. I don't want them to be looking dead and saggy. I want them to look alive. So I'm going to pull them up to about there, and they're just going to fall over if I don't do anything. So all I'm going to do is going to take a little piece of gaff tape, I'm going to roll it up, I'm going to put it behind these pillows, whether it's on a wall or this shelf. All I'm going to do is get these in the perfect spot and get those corners up. Now I'm going to do the same thing on both sides. Now we've got the bed looking great. Let's move on to the TV stand. For this TV stand, this is super simple. I want to bring some of these magazines down, but I don't want to overwhelm. I just want to break up that black expanse. So I'm just going to put a few magazines down here. We'll keep them beachy. All right, for the sofa, this is going to be pretty easy as well. I'm going to move this magazine. I'm going to hide this. And just like I did for the bed, I'm going to fluff up these pillows. Make them nice and puffy. Do the same thing down here. Get some life in them. I'm going to put them both on this end of the couch. I think single pillows by themselves are always lonely and they look kind of sad. So I'm just going to, again, put them right on top of each other, give a little bit of depth so you can see there's multiple pillows. You can see the entirety of the couch. So now looking at my progress so far, I'm liking where we're heading. The only thing I think now is that the table's a bit too close to the couch. I want to pull it out a little bit and give some separation so that it looks like things aren't on top of one another, and again, the eye can visually differentiate between the table and the couch. You may be asking how I'm able to see exactly what I'm doing from the camera. I'm using an iPad hooked up to a cam ranger, which allows me to see each individual picture or a live feed to the camera's live view function. So I can incrementally move this table until it's in the perfect location without having to go back and check and look at the back of the camera or a computer. What's interesting is that when I'm moving a table like this, sometimes in real life it may not be aligned realistically with the couch or the lines in the carpet, but to the camera it looks perfect. So keep that in mind. It may look a little bit funky to you, but to the camera it might look great. This is actually like the hotel services book. I'm going to put this over on the desk. I think it belongs with the phone and the concierge information. And I'm actually going to grab another magazine. I do like this. This is nice and thick, and I like the Hawaii right on the cover. And I'm going to put that magazine in here. And kind of, again, break up this expansive table. So I'm looking around this part of the room, and I think everything looks good. I didn't have to move the couch. I'm pretty happy with where it was. I really can't move it closer to that wall. I can't obviously move it this way, and if I come closer to the bed, it starts to get obscured and too close to the bed. So I'm happy with everything over here. Let's move over to the desk and finish that. So I'm looking at this little desk over here, and again, it is this large black expanse. I do want to break it up, so I'm going to actually use, like I said, I do like having this little pop of color. This is a brochure of the hotel, so I'm going to open it up. They've got all their services and everything offered on it. So I'm opening this. It's going to break up the desk. I'm going to leave the notebook and the pen here. I think that's pretty realistic. You'd expect to find a notebook and a pen next to the phone, making plans, doing whatever. And these chairs, I am going to angle a bit away from the camera. One of the cardinal sins in photography, I think, is when people take a chair and they put it dead on right towards the camera. It flattens out the chair. I like to think of furniture like a woman. When you're shooting a woman in the studio, do you ever shoot her like this? You know? No. You find a nice flattering angle, and again, the same holds true when you're shooting furniture. So I want it, rather than have this pushed in like this, or for some odd reason facing directly into the camera, I'm going to give this a little bit of an angle. It's going to be like almost a chair looking out the window. So it's ready for you to come enjoy this amazing desk with this amazing view. There's a little bit of angle. We see the lines, the architecture of the chair. It's not a flat, dull, straight-on chair shot. I'm going to do the same thing on the other chair on this side. Let's get this perfect here. I'm switching between live view and actually taking pictures on the Cam Ranger. And there we go. I think our staging is all set. There's a few things I want to tweak over here really quick, and that is this telephone and the little speaker system. And I'm just going to put this into live view, and we're going to tweak the phone until it actually registers as a phone. It's pretty small in the frame, but it has to be there because people are going to see it and they're going to expect it. So I'm going to get the phone in the perfect spot. I think that'll do it. So we've got the inside of the room looking great. The last thing I want to do is make that view perfect. I want to stage the outside, stage those tables and chairs, put a little room service out there, and bring this whole thing together. So we have this relatively dated table, and I want to pull this whole picture together. I want to make this look amazing. So what I've done is I've talked to my client. We've got some room service coming up here, but you want to be careful with this. You want to ask your client, do we need to bring room service into the room? If this picture ends up on Expedia or Travelocity or whatever service, and someone expects that there's going to be free room service in the room, and then they don't get it when they check in, they could be pretty angry and they're apt to complain. So what you want to do, ask your client, see if breakfast is included or something, and if so, go ahead and stage it up. But run it by your client first and make sure what is in the photo is included in the price. At this hotel, there is free breakfast, so we thought it would be okay. So the first thing we're going to do to fix this old ugly table is we're going to cover it. We've got a tablecloth. I'm going to go get that. We'll put it over here, and then we'll put the room service on top of the tablecloth. I'm going to just kind of set a scene here, make it look realistic. I take some napkins, those over the chairs. All right, we've got some coffee here. And of course, we've got flowers. This is Hawaii. Now remember, this might look funky in real life. We're shooting it from pretty far away, but I want everything to register as what it is to the camera. So orange juice glasses, coffee containers. I'm going to leave these teacups. I'm going to give them a little bit of height so you can actually see what they are. And I'm not going to go too crazy with this because now we're so far away from the camera. I just want to give people an idea of what's out there. But again, I want everything to show up. So we've got these orange juice glasses. We'll give them some distance between each other. And I'm going to grab a couple glasses of water, and I think that should do it. All right, and one thing, this light is moving pretty quick. It is the morning, so once this light is off, we're going to start shooting. I'm just going to wait for those shadows to go away. If you were under a time deadline and you had to shoot with these crazy light streaks, you could just grab a bed sheet or a scrim and clamp it up there and block that light. This is a very kind of unique case. You can see how thin these little slats are. So I imagine that'll be gone in just a couple minutes so we can get on with shooting. So all of our staging is complete. My camera is locked down. We're ready to start shooting. This is one of the most important things I'm going to tell you in this lesson. Once you have your camera set and your staging set, do not touch anything. Give a wide berth, right? Walk like a foot away from everything. Just try not to let anything get touched, because if it does, when you have to go to composite things together, it's going to be a living nightmare. So obviously the most important thing that cannot move is the camera. So I'm going to use the Cam Ranger to be triggering everything from now on. I'm going to kind of slowly back away here, get my Cam Ranger, and let's start shooting. Because we're in a pretty tight space and using a wide angle lens, I want to make sure everything is in focus. I'm shooting at f10, which is plenty of depth of field to get everything nice and sharp. I focused about a third of the way into the frame, and using the Cam Ranger I can verify that everything is tack sharp and ready to go. So let's take the first shot of our room, exposing for just the room itself. We're going to let the background blow out and see what we've got to work with. So as you can see, we've got to completely build the lighting in this room. This is pretty rough, and like I said, we have a crazy dynamic range between inside and outside. If I expose for the interior, I'm at 1/5 f11, and if I expose for the exterior, I'm at 1/200th f11. That's a huge difference in dynamic range. So the first thing I'm going to do is focus on just shooting the room itself. I want perfect, clean, uninterrupted light. So I'm actually going to close the curtains. In this case, we have sliding curtains. Close those and just light the room piece by piece. So we've gone ahead and closed these sliding doors, blackout curtains, whatever you want to call them. And there's still a little bit of funky light coming through. Like I said, the reason for closing these is to focus solely on lighting the interior, making it look perfect with no crazy colors. Now obviously if you look behind me, you can see some light coming through and causing this blue color cast on the floor. I'm going to grab some black cloth and I'm going to put it over these sliding doors to remove that color cast. Like I said, I want to focus on just lighting the interior and making it absolutely crystal clear and perfect. If I didn't have these doors, I'd probably have to use exclusively this black cloth, but most hotels have blackout curtains and you can get the same effect from it. Now that that's done, we have a clean slate to work from, we've got no funky color casts, and we can light this room however we want. So the first thing I'm going to do is increase my shutter speed. I want to kill most of this ambient light and then add flash to bring it back up. That's going to reduce the orange cast from the lights and the blue cast coming in the windows. Again, I've added this black cloth to remove the blue reflections on the floor, but I'm going to let the flash do most of the heavy lifting to ensure a good color. So here's my starting point, and as you can see, it's totally underexposed, and that's what we want. We're going to bring in lights and bring up the interior exposure now. So since we cannot hide flashes in this room, we're going to have to light one half at a time. I'm going to put 2 flashes on this side of the room, we're going to bounce them, and we're going to light this side, and then we're going to move them to this side of the room, bounce them, and light this side. And then in Photoshop, we're going to combine those and make our final picture. What I want is a relatively flat light that I can add texture to by light painting or using post and adding an ambient layer over the top of it. I've got to kind of pre-visualize my photo here. This is a pretty important thing and I need to stress it. You should have the finished photo in your head before you start shooting. That way you'll know where to put a light and how to light it. Since the predominant light source in this room is from this window, I'm going to have my flashes kind of replicate that. I'm going to put one in this corner at higher power, and I'm going to put one maybe halfway back in the room at lower power. That's going to give the effect that the light is still coming from this direction and it's going to look believable. If you lit from behind the camera at full power, again, what you've got is an expensive, glorified on-camera flash, which is going to flatten everything out and make it look very dull. Alright, so I've set up 2 of my B1s firing into the wall, again, to create some direction this way. Let's take a test shot and see how that looks. So I've got my first flash picture, and immediately I see a few problems. The color temperature is vastly different between the flash and the interior. This light over here has a bit of a daylight feel to it. The light on the fan is very orange, it's almost got pretty tungsten feel. This one's a bit yellow, tungsten to it, and then there's an LED above the bed, which I think is daylight as well. So I've got all these competing light sources. The way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to gel my light. I can't use this bright white flash because it's going to compete with the ambient light of the room. I could add a full CTO, that is color temperature orange gel, and that would make my light almost completely tungsten. I could add a quarter CTO, that's a little bit orange, or I could add a half CTO. Because there are so many competing sources in here that are all slightly orange but different temperatures of orange, I'm going to go with a half. I'm going to split the difference, add a half CTO. That should at least get my flash in the same ballpark as the rest of these lights. Alright, so we've added our gel. Let's see what that does. And as you can see, now the color temperature of the flash matches that of these interior practical lights much better. Alright, so I've got my 2 flashes bounced into the ceiling, adding light to the right-hand side of the frame. My right-hand side looks good. That's all I'm worried about for right now. I'm not worried about the fact that there's a flash in the picture or anything like that. I just want my right-hand side to look acceptable. And this is where the magic starts to happen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add light using this ProPhoto B1 in a beauty dish to add a little sizzle, a little pop, a little texture, depth, definition to all the things in this hotel room. That's what's going to give it this really nice, warm, inviting, glowy look that hotel photography really needs. As you can see, I've gelled this light as well to match the lights in the room. The reason I'm using a beauty dish is first, it's manageable. Using a big umbrella to light in here would be impossible. Second is that it's a little bit softer than a bare light, but not so soft as to be too diffuse to lose the effect we're going for. So when I'm adding this painted light, there's no scientific answer. You have to use your best judgment and decide it looks good for yourself. Personally, I like to light the room with my flash to be maybe 1 stop darker than perfectly exposed, and then I use my light painting to bring up some highlights and texture on the furniture and places of interest in the room. So now I'm going to take this, and again, coming from the direction of the window, because that is the predominant source of light here, I'm going to start painting light all over this furniture. Again, use your eye, use your judgment. If it looks good, go with it. If it doesn't look good, don't. One rule of thumb that I like to keep in mind is that I never light from the same direction as the camera. I always light towards the camera. That's what's going to give you the depth, the texture, and definition that's going to set your photos apart. My goal isn't to cover every single thing in this room with light. I'm just hitting the things that are interesting. The top of the table, for example, there's some great wood texture in it. I love the texture on the couch cushions and the wicker of the couch. For example, next to the bed, there's that really interesting kind of wooden light. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to hit the edge of the mirror to give it a little bit of separation from the wall. You don't need to go crazy. I am going to hit the floor. Again, I do like the wood on the floor. I like the way the carpet looks when that texture hits it. So use your judgment and hit what you think needs it. Now I have all the frames for this side of the room. My right-hand side looks great. I'm going to do the exact same thing, focusing on the left side of the room. All right, so I've moved the two lights from this side of the room to this side of the room, and now we're ready to paint this side of the room. With regard to power levels of lights, I'm not going to go into specifics because, as you know, every single situation, every room is going to be different. If I told you my exact settings for this room right now, it would not apply to any other room in the world. You're going to have to use your best judgment and figure out what looks good. Just keep in mind though, we do want to keep our lighting somewhat consistent. So the light towards the windows is going to be brighter, the light towards the bed is going to be a little bit darker. So the last thing I do before I open these windows up is I'm going to bracket for the interior only with all of these lights on. I may not use these files, but it's good to have every combination possible. Just in case I miss something on location, in post I can always pull out the shadows or bring down some highlights using those bracketed exposures. So now that we have everything we need for the bedroom, it's time to open up those doors and take care of the rest of the view. So as you can see in the video, there's a little bit of blooming. There's probably a lot of blooming. There's this white-blue halo around this whole window. Because the edges of these windows aren't defined when we expose for the interior, as you can see, we get this crazy blue haloing. Even if we were to expose for the exterior and then cut that in Photoshop, it would not look very good at all. We need to make a nice, crisp exposure for this interior, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use flash to bring up the interior while exposing for the exterior. That's going to give us a nice, crisp, well-lit, defined window view, which then we can easily composite together in Photoshop. So the first thing I'm going to do is lower my exposure and take just a shot for the exterior. As you can see, I have that nice dark, cleanly defined edge that I need, but there's no detail in the interior whatsoever. So what I'm going to do is grab my B1 with the beauty dish and fire the flash at the wall, which will in turn bring up the exposure on the interior. That'll give me a nice, crisp, believable photo, which I can then easily composite in to get the perfect view. Now as you can see, we have a nice lit interior and a perfectly exposed exterior. It's going to be super easy now to composite that together in Photoshop rather than trying to fight that extreme bloom caused by just exposing for the exterior with no interior lights. So we're almost done, guys. The very last step is to add some interesting light on this table out here. Just like I light painted inside, I'm going to light paint that table. I'm just going to do one pop. I think it's all we need. It's so far from the frame, we don't have to get crazy detailed with it. There's only a couple things left to do before we finish this up. I'm going to bracket from, again, what the camera thinks is the proper exposure, minus 4 or 5 stops in one direction because we got such a crazy dynamic range, and plus 4 or 5 stops in the other direction. I'm going to do this with the lights on and the lights off so I can avoid the color cast if I have to. We have some crazy lighting in here, and I want to make sure I've got complete control of it. After that, I'm going to use a color checker card, which is going to give me a point of reference to make sure I can get perfect color when I put this all together. Now this may have been a little bit overwhelming to digest. This is one of the most difficult shots that I do with a very, very high production value. If you want to shoot for high-end hotels, this is something that you've got to master. All that being said, let's take all of our pieces, jump into Photoshop, and put it together. So let's go over the post-production for this image. Now, on location, it was a super complicated picture, and honestly, it was one of the more simple rooms. I would have to say, a lot of the other photos in this tutorial are going to be easier to put together than this one basic room. Like I said, we can't hide the lights anywhere. We're gonna have to composite this all together. So this is a bit more complicated than I would like it to be for the first shot. For this first lesson, I'm not gonna go into all of the super nitty-gritty, like the fine detail and finishing work. I just want to keep the lesson basic and simple and get you used to kind of compositing two halves of the room together and adding light to get those really pretty hotel images. So like I said, there's going to be a few finishing touches and like some extra really fine techniques that I'm not going to go into super detail with. I'm just going to go over this on a very basic level and make sure that everyone who is following along can keep up. If you haven't done anything like this before and you feel like following along is a little bit too overwhelming, that's totally okay. I just want you to watch and I want you to get the gist, the general idea for how I'm piecing everything together. I will be teaching some more advanced kind of finishing touch techniques in further images. If you are following along, you can take those techniques from later and come back to this image to apply them here if you really want to flesh out the entirety of this shot. For this tutorial, I am going to be using Adobe Lightroom to prep all of my images for Photoshop. Now, some of you guys might use Aperture, some of you might use Capture One. Whatever your choice of raw processing is, I want to give you a brief overview of how I prep my files for Photoshop. I want to match all the white balances, get all the colors at least in the ballpark. I can tweak them perfectly in Photoshop. I want to pull up some shadows and pull down some highlights while I have all that raw information to work with. If I export these to JPEG or export them to PSD or whatever, I lose that raw data once I get into Photoshop. So I like to go ahead and make sure I get all of the information I can out of my files so I get the best possible quality file at the end of it all. Now, for the purpose of keeping the file size of this tutorial manageable, we are going to give you guys the JPEGs. I'm going to prep all the files in Lightroom for you, export these JPEGs right to my desktop, and then I'm going to work on the same JPEGs that you are. All right, so let's dive into this image. We'll do a little bit of touching up in Lightroom and get right into Photoshop. All right, so here down on our film strip in Lightroom, you can see these hundreds of images from where we just chose our initial composition. There's really no staging done or anything until our first image where we're using the light on the left-hand side of the room to light the right-hand side of the room. Now, I'm just going to use this as our kind of base image. So what I'm going to do is I can show you all of the other images I've selected. Now you can go through and look at all of these if you want, but some of them like the flash didn't fire, or I was in the wrong spot, or I'm just tweaking, and you saw a lot of those on location. You kind of got me running around here with the light in my hands, flashing everything and getting that lovely texture and color and depth out of all the different parts of the room. So before we get into editing this shot, I need to go through and extract the frames that I'm actually going to use in the final composite. Now when I'm in Lightroom, I kind of have to remember back to the shoot and remember what my idea was, what I was going for before I start culling. So if you'll remember, I wanted to light each side of the room independently, so bounce the lights into the left to light the right, bounce the lights into the right to light the left, and then add some light painting in between there and really get the life of this room to come out. So I need to go back and look for shots that kind of exemplify the look I was going for. And I'm going to rate those 1 star and just kind of set those aside here in Lightroom and use those for my final image later. So if I go through, you can kind of see, like, if I go back to the left on the film strip, I was still getting ready to shoot. And if we go forward, you can start to see when I get in there with my softbox and start painting light. And like, for example, this one, it looks like this light doesn't really spread too much. It's only this one tiny little spot. I want a bit wider light, a bit softer light over everything. So I'm going to look for a better one. This, I feel like, again, I kind of missed the couch entirely. I'm in the mirror and you see these fingerprints, so that's really no good. And it might take a while before I actually figure out the perfect power setting and all of that. So if you kind of want to keep an eye on this and look, the shots that I've selected have nice wide coverage of whatever object I'm trying to hit. And on the whole, I'm not going tiny with it. I'm trying to get like a wide area. If I back one up here, you can see I've only sort of hit the top left of the bed, and in the shot I've actually selected, I've hit the entire bed. You can see some of that cool shadow come around, and you have nice, even, consistent light across the entire surface. If you look at some of these images in comparison to the ones that I chose, you can see, like, for example, the floor looks really hot here, but over here it's much more even. I might use that piece for the floor. If I come back, you know, this looks like I missed entirely, or there's almost no light hitting the subject. I'm just looking for individual pieces of each frame that light a certain part of the room in a nice, soft, even way. Sometimes your power's wrong, sometimes you feather the light a little bit weird. The more even your light and your light painted highlights, the better. You didn't want crazy amounts of fall off. You don't want to be too close to the object because you get a really bright part of the scene close to the light and then too dark far away. But if you kind of find that balance and find that nice, soft, even light over everything, you can take those out and seamlessly blend them together into your final shot. All right, so Now that we've picked out some of our interior images, here you can see us bracketing with all of the lights off, just the practical lights inside. Now it's time to kind of focus on the exterior and that window frame. When I'm calling for the window frame, I want to make sure I have a nice, crisp, evenly lit piece of wood with no haloing or no, you know, like when the exterior is so blown out, you get that wavy edge and it's kind of fuzzy. I don't want any fuzzies. I want everything, again, to be sharp and crisp so that I can easily trace it out in Photoshop. The intensity and quality of light is pretty even from left to right here. It's not like this is super bright and this is super dark. And again, I don't have any awful reflections. Like, for example, I'm really trying to avoid reflections like this, that kind of white hot spot. And you can see if I go back a couple images, this gets rid of it entirely. So you want to have nice, even light, no bad reflections, no fuzzy edges. And it might take a couple attempts before you get that. But again, by looking at the Cam Ranger, you'll know exactly what you get before you come home and save a lot of headache in Photoshop. Lastly, I need to make sure I have some good ambient only frames. These are what I'm going to blend in to make everything feel very natural. If you only use flash to put your composites together, it's going to feel a bit flashy, a bit fake, and bringing back in some of those ambient only frames at a low opacity can really tie everything together, kind of make all your compositing much more believable. In this case, I did it with the lights on and the lights off. If you find that you're getting a funky color cast with the lights on, you can take an ambient frame with all the lights off and get perfect, clean, consistent color from front to back, it might come in handy, I'm not quite sure yet. So this is how I cull in most all of my lessons. I'm not going to go into super detail about it because it's kind of boring, but I wanted to give you an idea of what I'm looking for before I take my pieces and jump into Photoshop. So let's take all those images that we've chosen and go ahead and filter in Lightroom. I like to use the stars and the colors. If you have your own method for this, do whatever works best for you. And like I said, I like to edit things in Lightroom while I have all that raw data. Once we export these to Photoshop, we're losing a lot of raw data. We can't really push and pull the file so much without getting banding and graininess. So I like to get all of the information I can out of the raw file. The first thing I want to do is check my white balance. This to me feels a little bit warm. It's a lot of kind of yellow, brown, muddy feeling on the bed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the eyedropper. I'm not super critical of the color because I know I'm going to kind of do local color adjustment in Photoshop with curves and hue and saturation and all that. So I'm just going to pick a target neutral here as Lightroom asked me to do. I'm going to kind of clean up some of that yellowness, the whiteness. I do want a little bit of warmth. I don't want to go completely sterile. So as you can see, there's a little bit of warm glow still coming through. That's why I like to use predominantly flash in these, to kind of make everything clean, but still have a little bit of warmth. I don't want to totally nuke it and go all white. I feel like it feels really fake. So after I do my white balance, I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit. You can see if you go too far with it, it starts to feel kind of flat, kind of HDR-y. You lose the darkness. I do like a little bit of darkness in the shadows. It adds a lot of depth. The next thing I'm going to do is pull down the highlights. I like to make sure that before I go into Photoshop, I don't have anything that's blown out. I don't want any solid whites. So I'm just going to pull those down a little bit. And there you can see it's kind of done a little bit to tame the interior lights and some of the flash highlights throughout the room. I'm going to take those adjustments and I'm going to apply them to all of those interior photos where we have our room predominantly lit by flash, the windows closed, and I'm doing my light painting. So it looks like the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 shots all need that adjustment. So now that we've adjusted the interior photos, let's start working on the exterior. I like the color, I like the warmth of this wood. All I'm going to do here is bring up the shadows and bring down the highlights. Like I said, I think the color of the wood is fine. I don't need to tweak it too much. I like it a little bit warm, and we're going to be doing this individually, piece by piece in Photoshop, so we don't need to go too crazy with it. Again, I'm going to apply those. I'm going to Shift Command S to synchronize all of those settings across those 4 photos in Lightroom. Next, I need to sort of adjust for these exterior only photos where I was lighting the outside with flash. In this case, we do have a pretty big hotspot over here. I'm going to pull down the highlights, not too far. If I go too far, it looks ridiculous, but maybe just like halfway or so, and pull up the shadows a little bit as well. It might be a little dark out there overall, so I'll just bump it slightly. I'm just eyeballing this. There's no scientific method. I'm just trying to go piece by piece. So adjust the interior photos, adjust those transitional photos between inside and outside, and then adjust the outside so that it's in the ballpark of what you think you want it to look like. Lastly, there's this ambient photo for the outside. Just going to pull the shadows up a little bit, maybe make it a little bit brighter. This might not make any sense right now, but basically what I want to do is I want to take this photo and in Photoshop use this to get those natural shadows from that exterior. Lastly, we have our two ambient only shots. We can go ahead and, let's see, do a quick little white balance on there. That might warm it up a little bit. We get some nice kind of warmish interior glow here from that ambient shot because we do want things a little bit warm. And as usual, pull the shadows up a little bit, pull the highlights down. And on this last lights off photo, I don't think we'll need it. If we do, we'll come back and grab it. But for now, we have these 16 shots. I'm going to take these into Photoshop. We're going to open them up and put this shot together. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. I'm going to take a very quick minute here to show you how my Photoshop is set up. If you have a layout that works for you, a workspace that is your preference, I don't want to mess with that. But if you're following along, it might help you to kind of get everything similar to mine. All right, so I have my application frame unchecked. If you go to Window, Application Frame, I like to have that turned off. And if you go to Photoshop's Preferences and go to General, then if you go to Workspace, I have Enable Floating Document Window Docking off, and I have Open Documents as Tabs off. That's pretty much all you'll need for this tutorial. I don't have any crazy custom shortcuts or anything, and the first time I use the tool, I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing so you can follow along. And then if you want to set things up to your preference, to your taste, feel free. Again, this is just so that we're kind of on the same page and you don't have any trouble with windows sticking to one another or anything crazy like that happening. For every lesson in this tutorial, I have all the JPEGs ready to go for you, and here's what I want you to do. You're going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and you're going to go to Browse, and then navigate to this Lessons folder, and within each lesson there will be a folder containing all of the files for this lesson. You can go ahead and click all of them. You can shift click or command or control click, select all of those files, go ahead, click Open, and then click OK. This will load all of those files into a stack already aligned on top of one another, so it'll be super easy for you to edit these in Photoshop. If you are using Lightroom and you want to go straight from Lightroom, you can right click and you can hit Open as Layers in Photoshop or Open in Photoshop, but Lightroom does have great integration with Photoshop. That is why Lightroom is really my tool of choice for this. All right, so here we are in Photoshop, and as you can see on the right-hand side in our Layers panel, we have all of our files lined up ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these off, except for the bottom two. Now, once we get down here, you can see everything is perfectly lined up. The image is perfectly on top of one another, so all I have to do is add a mask and brush away the top layer to reveal the bottom. So the first thing I need to do here before I start doing any crazy compositing is make my base layer, and the base layer is what I'm going to build everything else in this image out of. So I know that I lit the left-hand side of the room and the right-hand side of the room, so what I want to do is I want to hide the light in the middle of the frame here. And as you see, layer 15, I've lit the left, layer 16, I've lit the right, so I can basically just erase, using a mask, just erase this light from the scene and reveal the layer below it. So I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to click this button down here, and if you have any questions about how to make masks or how to adjust them, go back to the Intro to Photoshop lesson in this tutorial. And I'm going to select a large brush at 100% opacity and set the foreground color to black. And I'm just going to, using that brush, sort of paint out that area where that light is. And if you go too far and things start to look a little wonky, you can kind of adjust the brush. You can use the X key to go back between your foreground and background colors and reveal and hide until you have a seamless blend of the two images. So let's just do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and play with my opacity a little bit, brush things in and out until I get what I think is going to be a solid base layer. Again, just combining those two images to get one image that does not show any lights in it or have any hint that we had to take our lights on the right and the left and then put them together. I'm not worried about the ceiling. You can see that the The ceiling fan looks like it moved in the wind. I know I'm going to replace the ceiling and the fan later. But for right now, this looks pretty good. As you can see, I've effectively erased that light stand and the light and the hotspot from the frame using a mask. Now I can go ahead and I can group these two together. I can just select both, hit Control or Command G, and I will double click to rename this layer. I'm going to call it Base. And I'm not going to worry, the next number 14 layer here is the ambient interior frame. I'm not going to worry about that for right now. What I want to do is now start using our light painted images to build up the interior of this shot. So let's go ahead and turn on layer number 13. And this is kind of this little sitting area right in here. I can go ahead and, I like to do this, I like to add a black layer mask. So I'm going to Alt click the Add Layer Mask button, add a black layer mask. Taking my brush, my preference is to start with my brush at 30% opacity. You can go 80, 70, 60. I like 30. It gives me a very easy kind of natural blend with a soft white brush. And I'm just going to start painting in that light painted area, making sure I don't go too far over the light stand. If you do go too far, set your foreground color to black and paint it back out. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Make sure you don't get my leg. All right, so we've added our first little light painted area. Let's go up for number 12 and do the couch here. Same thing, I'm going to Alt click to add a black layer mask, take my brush, set the foreground color to white by hitting X, and I'm just going to paint in the highlight on that couch. If you go too far, you can switch your foreground color and paint it out. You want to make sure that you don't get any of your of the light, of my body parts, anything like that, and you can shift click on that layer to disable the mask and see what is underneath it. Next up is the bed here, number 11. Same thing. I'm going to Alt click, add a black layer mask, take a brush, set the foreground color to white, and I'm going to paint that light painted frame in over the bed. Now if you go too far, you start accidentally painting over our previous frames. So you want to make sure that you're careful and you want to paint out any of the excess. And one easy way to kind of avoid that problem is you can change the blend mode of that layer to lighten. Changing the blend mode to lighten is only going to allow that brighter light painted hotspot to be visible. It's going to take whatever is brighter in the layer on top and only show that on the darker layer below. So if you have two frames and one is lighter and one is darker, by using the lighten blend mode, you'll only show the lighter parts of the layer above. And you can change the blend mode between lighten and normal and go back and forth to blend everything together seamlessly. If I go to layer number 10 here, now I'm on the left-hand side of the frame. I'm going to Alt-click to add a black layer mask. I use my brush at 30% opacity and white in the foreground and paint in that highlight on that left-hand side. Next up is number 9. These are the chairs in that desk area right here. Same thing, Alt-click, add a black layer mask. Now in this case, I know if I just start painting in, I'm going to lose the layers underneath. So I'm going to go and change this blend mode to lighten to make sure only the brighter highlights are visible when I start to paint that layer in. And again, if you go too far, you start to get my knee and my shirt. So let's paint that out and keep it confined to the desk. Right, now we have number 8, this dresser area. Alt-click, add a black layer mask. Take our brush and start gently painting that in. Again, using a nice soft brush and maybe 30% opacity to sort of cover our tracks. Same thing with number 7. Alt-click, add a black layer mask, switch my brush to white, and gently sort of paint in that hot spot. Okay, this is looking pretty good, and I'm going to take a minute here and I'm going to organize this file. I'm going to take all those light painted layers, 7 through 13, and you can shift click or you can command click or control click, select all those layers, and then I want you to click on this Group from Layers button, or you can hit Command or Control G, and we'll name that Added Highlights. And I'm just going to turn that layer on and off and sort of see our work, and I can go in and edit things where I think I went too far or I didn't do it enough. Personally, I think this looks better with the normal blend mode, and I think the shadow is a bit too far, so I'm going to paint it out, sort of remove some of that unnatural shadow down there. And I can zoom in and make sure my mask is nice and clean along the edge of this bed. And then I think I went a little too hard over here on these chairs. So on this mask, number 9, I can select that mask and using a brush sort of paint out the light painted areas to get a more natural kind of feel. Same thing over here, a little bit too hot. So I'll paint out some of that to keep some natural shadows in there, but I still want some of that nice crisp sort of light painted feel. And now if you want to adjust all of these layers, you can actually add a mask to the group, and then you can mask out parts of the group accordingly. So if you want to take a big soft brush and you feel like this whole floor is too bright, you just want to take some of that out, you can adjust the entire group at once by working on that group layer. All right, so if I turn that on and off, you can see the interior has started to come to life a little bit. We've got some great shadow and highlights and nice detail. The next step is to take care of this door out here. Now obviously we can't leave this giant flag, big scrim against the window, so we have to get rid of that. And the way I do this is, I know that we lit all of these window frames, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the pen tool, and again, this can be confusing. If you have any questions about how that works, refer back to the Intro to Photoshop lesson. And around the entire wooden door, I'm going to make a selection using the pen tool. When you're doing this, guys, make sure that you go and get around all of the furniture, but make sure that you keep the entire window and door frame intact. So I'm going all around the desk, around the little brochure here, up the back of the chair. And again, you got to kind of think in sort of a three-dimensional mind. You can't just slice right through the lamp to get the door. You got to go all the way around the lamp and make sure that you're only selecting what's behind the furniture. So I'll have to come back down and get pieces that I've missed. So I'll come up here, and then I'll make sure to come down and get this little piece right here. And then I'll come over and get this little area like underneath the armrest in the couch. Really zoom in there. I'm well over 100% now, just to make sure I get everything possible. And lastly, it looks like we got to come down here to get up behind this chair. All right, so we've made our selection all around this window, but there's one thing I'm forgetting, and that is in the mirror, we have more, and I want to make sure that I get all of that door everywhere I possibly can. So the same thing here in the window. Make sure you go around the furniture. All the way up to keep everything very realistic. Okay, so our path is complete and we need to turn this into a selection. Let's go ahead and hit Command Enter or Control Enter if you're on Windows, and that's going to turn all of that pen path into a selection with these little marching ants everywhere. I'm going to feather the edge of this selection, so you can go to Select, Refine or Modify, Feather, or you can hit Shift F6, and I like to feather my selections by like 1 pixel. Go ahead and click OK. That's going to give a nice soft edge to everything. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to make a new group. I'm going to come down here and click on this Create New Group button, and I'm going to rename that group, we'll call it Door, and I'm going to apply this selection to the group as a mask. So go ahead, click this Add Layer Mask button, and if I alt-click on that, what you see we have is a perfect mask around the entire door, all the windows, and the mirror. And from there, we can start building our exterior scene. So alt-click to turn that off, and let's drag layers 3 through 6 into that door group. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on layer number 6. And what that is that right-hand side of the door, but it's, if you'll notice, because it's in the group with the mask on it, the mask constrains that picture to the window frame. Like you can see where our legs get cut off down here. Now this is where the fun begins, right? You can go ahead and I'm going to have you alt-click to add a layer mask filled with black on that layer. We're going to select a brush, and working in this group on this layer, I'm going to start gently brushing in the right-hand side of that door frame. What that does is that reveals our light painted door frame without any haloing, any muddiness, any weirdness. We get a perfect cutout of that frame. I'll do the same thing on the right-hand side, on the mirror here. And now obviously this isn't acceptable, we've got to do the rest of it, so let's go ahead and turn on layer 5 and do the same thing. We're going to reveal a little bit more. There's a little bit better color in this layer, and just seamlessly blend it all together. Now we can go with layer 4. We're getting over to that left-hand side here. Alt-click, add a black layer mask, paint over us in the middle there. Revealing more and more of that door, getting rid of all that flag. All right, now last we have the left-hand side, layer 3. So let's alt-click, add a black layer mask, and start painting in that lit door frame. What I see, it looks like it's a little bit faded up here. You can refine this as much or as little as you want. If I want to kind of hide some of that reflection, I can look at my other layers and I can sort of see which layers don't have that kind of ugly flash reflection up there. It looks like I can steal some of layer 5 and paint that in. And just going back and forth, refining that mask until I get a perfect natural blend of that entire door frame. Okay, so what we've done is we've gone ahead and we've masked out and pen tooled out this entire door frame so that if we zoom in, we have a perfect crisp edge for us to work with. Okay, so now that we have our perfect door frame with no haloing or fuzziness or blown out pieces, I need to go ahead and make our exterior perfect as well. So just like I did for the door frame, I'm going to take the pen tool and I'm going to make a selection all around the edges of this door frame which opens to the exterior. It's just kind of nested, like we keep going wider and wider with it until we refine the entire picture to exactly what we want with the best pieces of the interior and the exterior. So again, I'll go all the way around that door frame. I don't need to go that far. Let's go to the edge of like the patio here. Again, using the pen tool to get that perfect. So now that we have our path, let's go ahead and make that into a selection. So I'm going to hit Command Enter, and I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Feather by 1 pixel, hit OK. And I'm going to make a new group, and I'm going to call it Exterior. And I'm going to drag and drop layers 1 and layers 2 into that group. Now I'm going to select the group, and using that selection, I'm going to add a mask to the group, which if I alt-click on, you will see is just a perfect white revealing mask for the exterior. Now if I go ahead and turn on layer 2 here, what I get is that nicely lit exterior frame within the window, perfectly cut out, with no haloing, no fuzziness. We just have a perfect view. But to me, this looks a little bit fake, so I'm going to take my layer number 1 here, this exterior ambient layer. I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to alt-click to add a black layer mask. Take a white brush, maybe at 30% opacity, and start brushing in a little bit of that ambient light to make the whole patio feel much more natural and less flashy. Right? Doesn't that feel way more natural than that totally flashy foreground? And I'm going to do the same thing. Let's see, if I turn that mask off, yeah. Let's do the same thing up top, but if I use a brush here, I'm going to start to get some bleed into the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, let's just do it quickly with a lasso here. I'm just going to lasso that upper sort of edge of the frame. And I'll come around, something like this. This is just going to confine the brush to this area, so when I brush that back in, it stays sort of within that lassoed area. I can Command D to turn that off. And what you're left with is a perfectly natural view outside. That might be a little much, so like maybe we can take our brush and refine things a little bit, paint away some of that to make it a little brighter, to get something like that. And lastly, I want to make sure we don't forget the mirror. I almost just totally forgot. So do the same thing that we did with the mirror for the exterior using a pen tool. Cut that out, Command Enter, feather that edge, 1 pixel. And back on the exterior group, you can go ahead and paint in that exterior view using a brush. Now again, if you go too far with it, you can paint it out so it doesn't feel so fake. I just like to blend everything together. Again, that's why I like to use that 30% opacity brush so that everything feels pretty real, pretty realistic. That 30% opacity really helps to keep it nice and soft until you cover your tracks. Yeah, that's looking really good. All right, I think we could clean up this mirror a little bit. Let's see why that looks a little bizarre. I think it's just the reflection in the glass kind of making it look a little weird, and that's okay. But for the most part, as you can see, this picture's looking really, really good. And I feel like the exterior should be a little bit brighter. So what I'm going to do is in this exterior group, I'm going to add a new adjustment layer. I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer. And because it's within that mask group, all my curves adjustments are only going to affect that exterior, so I can go ahead and make this feel a little bit brighter, a little bit more natural. I don't want to lose the blue in the sky, but somewhere like that will feel good. Just to keep it real. As you know, in real life, the outside's always much brighter than the inside. And this is looking really good. Like, I'm very happy with this so far. I think we have some color correction to do, and I still have to fix our blurred ceiling. So in order to really make this image feel both surreal and natural and beautiful and perfectly retouched, I'm going to add some ambient light to tie this all together and make it feel natural and not so lit. So I'm going to take my 14 layer here, number 14, drag it all the way to the top just so we can easily keep working on everything. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And using the pen tool, what I'm going to do is let's start with the ceiling. So I'm going to pen tool the ceiling out, just following that seam between ceiling and wall. Get right in there. And what this is going to do, this is going to give me a natural ceiling with no fan motion. So go ahead, hit Command Enter and Shift F6 to feather that edge. And let's apply a mask to the ceiling. So all we're left with is that natural ceiling, which feels a little bit white to me, a little bit cool. I know the ceiling was pure white and the walls were a little bit warm, but this still feels a little unrealistic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm up this ceiling just a bit. Let's reactivate this mask. If you zoom in and command click on a mask, you get this little selection icon show up on the hand. So go ahead, command click on the mask. What you get is our pen tooled selection already back in action. And I can go to, let's say, the solid color adjustment layer here. And like I said, I want to warm this up just a bit. So I'm going to grab like a medium orange like this. And I'm going to set the opacity of this color fill layer here to 10%. That might even be too much. But that actually feels pretty good, right? 10% opacity. The warmth matches the rest of the room. We have like a nice bit of warmth and a little bit of whiteness on the bed. So everything is sort of on the same page color-wise here. So my next move to really kind of finish this shot is to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. So let's go ahead, zoom in, click the hue and saturation adjustment. And using the hand tool here, I want to take some of the yellows out, push some of the whites so they're a little bit crisper. So I'm just going to select, like over here on this wall, that's kind of the color that's driving me nuts. And Photoshop's telling me that it's the reds, but I feel like it's a little more of the yellow and orange that I want to pull out. So I'm going to drag that slider over and just going to pull down the saturation on those reds and yellows. And you can see what that does. It sort of cleans up the walls, cleans up the yellows, but it's gone a little too far on some of the woods. So taking a brush on that built-in mask that comes with the hue and saturation adjustment layer, I'm going to set my foreground color to black. I'm going to go to 100% opacity. I'm just going to paint out that mask where I don't think I want it, like on this pillow, for example, on the runner on the bed. Bring back some of those natural yellows on the woods, and especially on the woods, because I like those nice and warm, or on the lights and the couch. A little bit outside. I don't think we have to worry so much about that. But what's that done is it's really kind of cleaned up the whites, made it feel a bit brighter overall. All right, we're getting really close to being totally done with this shot here. So let's just take a minute and see what else we can fix. If I wanted to go one step further with the whites, some guys really like bright, bright white beds in their hotel photography. You can add a selective color adjustment layer, and you can go to the neutrals or the whites, and you can adjust the black point here. And what that does, you can see the further I go with it, the whiter my whites are going to get. So this is almost kind of like a dingy white. That's a nice bright white, but if you go too far, things get a little blown out. So don't go too nuts with it. You go like to there, and do the same thing where it says neutrals here. This one is very easy to go too far with, so you don't need to go any further than like -10 on that. Maybe -5 is fine. If I turn that on and off, again, a little bit of punch in the whites, but maybe a little too far on the ceiling. So I'm going to take a brush. I'm going to go ahead and paint out some of that in the ceiling to keep it feeling natural. But all right, I think this is looking really, really good. And like I said, that's just a very basic edit. If I wanted to take this another step further, I totally could, and we will in the coming lessons. But the last thing I'm going to do here is Command-Alt-Shift-E to flatten all of our work to a new layer. And I'm going to drag out my ruler lines here to make sure that my vertical lines are perfectly vertical throughout the image so that nothing feels like it's falling over or leaning, and that it feels like a nice, solid architectural image. The hotel is standing up nice and straight and not in danger of falling over or anything like that. So you want nice vertical lines. I'm actually going to pull that out from the bottom so that I don't have to crop it all. There we go. How about the left-hand side over here? Looking really good. All right, so I'll go ahead and hit Enter. Just a quick vertical adjustment and hide my rulers. And if I zoom in, I think that looks really, really good. If I turn off all my layers and just hide and reveal, look at the difference, right? That's just amazing. It was a ton of work and probably a little bit confusing if this is your first time doing this, but the difference is really, really astounding. You have a beautiful interior, perfect exterior with no blooming or halo around the windows, and a perfect view to that amazing Hawaiian ocean and that nice bright sky. We got everything that we need to show in this hotel room. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. There's still a lot that I personally see that I would want to fix. We're going to get to that in future lessons. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and save this shot as our final. We're going to go back on location and jump into our next lessons.